Welcome to Abuelas in Accion. My name is Marie Dahlstrom, and I'm here with my wonderful co-hosts and comadres, Consuelo Zaragoza and Itzia Mejia. Thank you for joining us today at our virtual roundtable, where we join together to honor the memories and legacies of our abuelas who are living and those who have passed. Abuelas en Acción is a multicultural and multi-generational podcast where we lift our voices for our common good. We speak about hope and gratitude, even in the midst of our pain during this time of so much global turmoil and grief. We here at Abuelas, we mujeres, we gente, we resist the loud voices of oppression, violence, and anger. And we resist efforts to drown out our voices and loudly speak our truth. The poet Mary Oliver writes, "If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate, give into it." Today, we are talking about the healing power of writing and how writing reminds us of what is joyful. With so much darkness in the world right now, we can be consumed with fear and apprehension. Writing and telling our stories on a daily basis, an hourly basis, all of the time, taps into our creativity, our intuition, our inner voice, and our joy. A good friend of ours, the author Tanmi Sethi, describes joy as an act of resistance, our own internal revolution. To feel joy gives us the capacity to feel our pain, to hold it gently, and then use it as rocket fuel for our personal revolution, to love ourselves and to embrace hope. The poet David White writes, "What is precious inside us does not care to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence." Today, we are so pleased to have a favorite author of ours, Emilly Prado. She's returning. She was here last summer in 2022. Emilly is an accomplished author who lives in Portland. And actually, she has so many other talents, but we know her best as an author who wrote her most recent book, Funeral for Flaca, which we loved. Funeral for Flaca is an essay collection called, quote, "Utterly Vulnerable, Bold, and Unique," by Ms. Magazine and a winner of the 2022 Pacific Northwest Book Award, a 2021 bronze winner of the Forward Indies Book of the Year Award in Essays, and she has received other honors. Emilly writes about the importance of healing and of community. And she has used writing as a tool to process, to amplify the stories of people who have historically been pushed to the margins through journalism. And now she shares her own experiences through memoir, essay, and fiction forms. Emilly writes, "I don't always have the ganas or access to think of writing as a career. I didn't always have the ganas or the access to think of writing as a career, but I'm honored to center it in my work today as an artist, educator, and community organizer. I didn't end up knowing this in my life. I'm building what was within reach, but my mommy always believed in the power of my writing, and I finally do too." Welcome back, Emilly. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. I love all the quotes too from fellow writers and poets, and my wheels are just turning thinking about what we're talking about, which is the healing power of writing. And I think just how how profound words can come to people when we're in sort of these deep moments of just writing and, things that transcend time sometimes when you're just trying to put words to feelings and emotions. Yeah, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing all that.
Well, and thank you for our mamas for all that they have done for us, because if it weren't for them, right, we wouldn't be here. And they believed in us in ways that we didn't believe in ourselves. And so it's these moments, Emily, and I love how you put that. These moments really center and ground us, and especially as people who historically have been underrepresented in with our stories and our voices, these moments help us to be able to tap into our cultura, our family, our ancestors, and our spirituality in a way that we don't get out there in the white dominant world. So I love these moments. So thank you. So tell us, it's been a while since we had you as our guest. Tell us what you're working on right now.
Yeah, so thanks again for having me. I am now still finishing the draft of the memoir that I began in 2012. For those of you who haven't heard me talk about this before, I started a memoir when I was struggling with being hospitalized. I self-admitted to a psychiatric stay and was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 20. And I do write about this in Funeral for Flaca, very briefly in an essay, but this is a book-length work that I have been trying to write for this time. And it's just been a practice of trusting the process, of knowing that it's going to take as long as it's going to take. And it's very challenging at times, but, sort of what we're talking about today is it can also be very healing to have the opportunity to just think deeply about moments in my life, and also seeing how far I've come since all of this has happened. And I'm also working on a novel, which I'm excited to get to work on more deeply. I think I need to focus on the memoir. That's just been a long standing goal of mine to finish this project. And the novel is also has been created out of needing to have a break from writing memoir, which can be very emotionally challenging. And through the novel, I'm exploring sort of like a near future that is regarding like climate change having progressed further. And I don't want to call it a dystopian because I don't quite think that's the world that I'm creating. But it has come actually from this question of like, what does it mean to have children in a world that maybe isn't, going to look the same, maybe isn't going to be here at some point. And so that is sort of the seed that started this novel, this question that I had and that I'm grappling with, like as a woman in my early 30s. And even though that's kind of maybe a scary concept, it's been a lot of joy to me to explore this mother-daughter relationship from a mother who does choose to have a child in this time, and it's set in Mexico, and I'm excited to work on that as well. So I'm kind of balancing these projects and trying to stay focused to make progress on one so that I can then turn to the other.
Well, what I would say to our listeners, stay tuned because we will have Emily back to talk about her newly published work. It all sounds wonderful and so relevant and so needed in this time of our world. Consuelo, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Emily, good to see you. I have a couple of questions. First, we would love to hear about your journey again, a little bit more about becoming a writer and what inspired you and what challenges did you encounter? You just talked a little bit about you're in the process, but what really did dio ganas, right, to be that writer, and how you got there?
It's been a really long process. I give a talk actually called Finding My Way to Funeral for Flaca because I didn't really see the narrative of myself as an author growing up. I did not always know that I could be a writer, as I mentioned, right? That Marie read from that bio on my website. And part of the reason was there wasn't a lot of representation regarding, Latina authors. I think I could think of maybe one or two growing up, like Sandra Cisneros. But honestly, like I didn't really feel super connected to the writing that I was reading growing up. And it wasn't until a couple of different moments, one of which is finding the music of Tupac Shakur first and foremost, loving his music and the way that I felt like I was getting sort of a more real education by his music and talking about oppression and sort of like the struggles of people in a way that I wasn't learning in school. And I was feeling that through sort of these narratives he was creating. There's particularly the song Brenda's Got a Baby, which I have sort of different feelings about now in some ways, but in essence, he's talking about like community responsibility and sort of like all the different parameters that lead certain people to make certain choices in their life or lack thereof, right? Not having choices to make other choices. And I found a book of poetry from Tupac in middle school, and it was really powerful to see basically handwriting on one side from Tupac's journals, right, on like ruled paper that I had access to, and then seeing the other side where the poem was then sort of transcribed and typed. And so I had never seen a book of poetry or writing that to me at that point like sounded like me, where he wrote in slang, he used the number 2 instead of writing TO, which as a person I was using the internet at that time. I thought that was really cool. So that was kind of a small green light that, hey, maybe all books don't have to sound like Shakespeare or whatever, right? And be written in a super flourished language or be inaccessible to me in that way. And then the other moment was that my sister gave me a diary when I was 13 as well. And that changed my life because I didn't know if I would like writing. I didn't really know what I would write about, but I tried. And what I found was when I would write, and I didn't usually know how I was feeling going into it. I just knew maybe I was really upset or overwhelmed, but through writing, I could then reread and even in that moment start to calm down enough to recognize, oh, this had happened, and then this is why I feel this way. And it became a way for me to actually identify feelings when at that time I would just get so overwhelmed. I couldn't. Writing was the way that I started to. And then after that as well, I would use writing. I would write letters to different adults in my life to speak for me because I had a hard time actually speaking aloud when I was younger. I would, anytime in conflict or just something that was really emotionally heavy, my voice would really tighten and I couldn't talk. I would start crying usually or just shut down. But writing was a tool then that I could also use to share my voice. And over time, through a very long time, I just kept being drawn to writing, and even in college, not really thinking that it was practical to be a writer. I tried to still, I tried to write for the newspaper. And eventually after I graduated, I did an internship. And it wasn't until this past summer, actually, of this year, that I earned my MFA in creative writing because I just had to take, I think, the time that I needed to really secure that path. And you don't have to have an MFA to be a writer, but for me, it was a kind of a gift to myself. I've always loved writing since I was 13, maybe not since I was 5. And I finally wanted to give myself the time of studying it even more deeply. And so it's been a continued journey. And I also see myself as a lifelong learner. One of the great things too about being an author, I think, is that you only get better over time because you continue to learn and develop. And so I'm excited to see what the future holds as well in my writing journey.
No, that's great. Thank you. That's very powerful and will inspire a lot of people. The second question I have is, can you talk, and you mentioned this a little bit in what you just said, but talk to us about the healing power of writing. especially now in the difficult times in our lives and in our world?
Yeah. So I think writing can definitely be really healing depending on sort of how you're approaching it and where you're at. I also teach a class about writing and sort of healing and trying to find the right ways to sort of express your feelings and emotions. And I think there are some people where writing is not going to be the way to do that because maybe you're sort of stuck in a particular mindset, and it's actually can be very unhealthy to stay in that cycle when you're sort of free writing and things like that. So I think in order for writing to be healing, I think the parameters need to be safe. And so I think every person needs to figure out what that is for themselves. But for me, journaling first and foremost can be extremely healing. It can be very grounding for me. And even just like being able to identify my emotions. But thinking about writing in private versus writing in public, I think are also two sides of healing. When we're talking about the world and difficult times, being able to write something and have people hear it or read it or listen is extremely powerful. And I think that can also be a form of healing. I just, again, want to like warn people to make sure to take care of themselves when they're doing it. But writing is, for me, the way that I feel most heard and seen in the world. And also, I feel like most connected to other people when I read their work. And so I think for anyone who's wondering, should I write? It's a difficult time. These are the times that we need to be writing and continuing to write. And maybe how Tupac showed me that writing can look and sound different. I think for anyone who's listening as well, that's a gift I want to offer back to you of figuring out what is the way that writing might be your platform and what form does it need to take. And for me, that has been essaying and journalism, but maybe it's poetry for you, or maybe it is writing rap or other forms, right? But at the end of the day, if we're using writing to express our struggles, our hopes, our dreams, that is very healing and powerful.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely, I think, if our listeners have listened to our previous episodes, writing has been a big theme of this season, and especially when it comes to healing and expressing yourself. Like myself and many of my peers, just an overall the social media presence, we all kind of share this pain for the world. And we have a feeling of loneliness and helplessness. And a lot of times, social media being ever growing accessibility, it gives us sometimes tools like journaling. I know a lot of times, especially during COVID, journaling was glorified. Like, oh, you should buy this guided journal or you should do this. And to me at that time, it didn't seem like I could be a writer, that I could use this as a tool. It seemed either very inaccessible or very whitewashed, where I couldn't sit down, and I had tried to sit down and just kind of write, and it wasn't really clicking for me. And it wasn't until with Marie and the work we did last summer or this past summer of trying to reclaim writing, it was when I realized that it didn't have to be all in English, that I could use my Spanish, that I could use my rhythm. And in exploring these, I know along with Marie and Consuelo, we all began using this as a tool. And a lot of times, especially when we have these feelings of overwhelmness because the social media is bombarding us with take care of yourself, but also look at everything that's going on in the world and we need to change. And so it feels that this toolbox that we've been building and writing being something above it all and something that kind of has been bringing us together. I know just collectively, this journey that we've been through with Marie and Consuelo which has been, I know, cross-generational. It's a thing too, where for me and the students that I kind of led through this writing process and Marie and Consuelo being through, it's very different, but also it brought us very close together and gave us hope, both for them and for ourselves. So I don't know. I want to open it to Marie and Consuelo. Do you want to share a little on your experience?
Marie, go ahead. I'll go after you.
Well, I would like to echo everything that Itzia has said, because it certainly reflects what writing has become for me. I would have to say I now see writing as such an essential part of my thriving. I have little journal books. I carry them in my purse, my backpack, even on hikes. And I would call myself more of a journalist. I use journaling and just writing down, even if it's just one sentence or paragraphs, to have a place that is sacred for me to write. I was sharing with Consuelo and Itzia last night. I went to bed feeling fearful of where we as a country are headed, in terms of the road to autocracy, the road to reelecting an individual who now is threatening to set up camps on the border to arrest more families, and to just, fill in the blanks, and being fearful of war that's happening. And I couldn't sleep well, and I got up and I started writing, and my joy came back. My joy. I was reading poetry. I looked out the window, and I live here in San Antonio, and looked at the birds. We're very happy to have cooler weather, by the way, up here in Texas. And it brought my joy back, and it brought me back to what's important, my hope, and my gratitude for this moment with you all, because this is healing and this is nourishing for me.
Thank you. When, we all talked about those tapes that we have in our head about writing, right? I can't write. Why am I doing this? I really can't, produce anything. And so those tapes were in my head for so long, right? And so this conference that Itzia and the Mariposas Poderosas and their professor came last spring. And it was the Familias en Accion conference. And so we all were going to be presenting poems to the audience, and I would sit down and I would start writing something, and nothing would come, right? Nothing would, and it's like, what? And then all of a sudden, this poem came, and it was about the women in my family. I mean, I wrote it within 3 minutes. And I went, okay, and it was very, very emotional for me. And just the words and the hands and how, I mean, it was just amazing. And I had to take that as a sacred gift, right? And to know that that's there, and it can come. And to really to be able to sit down and give myself the grace and the time, and know that I have the knowledge that comes. And so what I have found is that when I write about my cultura and my family and the history, that's what just brings up all this incredible emotion for me, and gratitude, but also knowing that as all of our families have experienced pain, for who they are or for what they did or where they came from. But then I also see the joy, and the women in my family were very humorous, and remembering those things. So it's been really it's in my corazón, right? I mean, because that's where it comes from for me. So I'm still a lifelong learner as well, and learning and just knowing that the knowledge is there, and just giving it time and the practice. So it's been a wonderful to experience that, to let myself experience that finally.
Yeah, it was definitely, it's very liberating. I want to say it feels freeing, not only for my thoughts and organizing what I'm feeling and what I'm seeing, but also just my emotions and letting them, like you said, Consuelo, just letting myself trust the process and trust that it's healing me. And regardless of, I don't put parameters to it. I don't have to write an essay for the 3 to 5 paragraphs on a research topic. It's very on what I want to do and claiming it for my own. And I know it has brought us together. I think a lot of this writing and sharing our feelings and being open from our hearts just has helped kind of build that community and continue pushing our hope. And by telling our stories, we're just building these connections while also honoring and learning from one another. And I know Emily talks a lot on her book about, we would be in about these topics and feeling liberating. So we would be honored to hear from your wonderful book.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. And I also just want to mention, I really appreciate each of you sharing how writing has been healing for you and like the power that you found in it, because I think writing is so personal. So it's hard for me to say sort of like on a global basis, how can writing be healing for every individual? Because I don't know, what do they need healing from, right? What has been their experience, and what are they sort of working through with their writing? And ultimately, though, what I all hear too of us sharing is the different access points to which we find being our way to writing, and also how it empowers us. And that's, I think, the most important thing to hit is like your practice can look very different than someone else's. You have to just figure out what is your practice, and whether that's journaling, writing for private, whether that's writing for public, whether that's, I want a deadline to read this poem at a particular stage, and that's going to help me with putting, getting past those scripts or those tapes or those, I call it the inner critic, who can take the form of different people. But once we can try to keep on going, it's a continual practice of getting to the page and figuring that out. I think that can be super empowering, right? And it's ultimately, I always want to hit home to my students, anyone I'm talking to, that it is about continuing to develop your particular creative vision and lens. I can't tell you how to write or in what way, and neither can sort of, publishing standards, because that is just boring and not what everyone needs, right? And yeah, so I just really appreciate all y'all sharing. And we're also each individually contributing to, the archive of the breadth of what writing can be and what it can look like. And this podcast as well, which is incredibly, I think, healing and powerful. So just thank you all for the work that you do. I'm going to read from, for Flaca, my essay collection. And it is a collection that spans from the time I was about 5 to 29 when I published the collection. Essays look very different than maybe the 3 to 5 point argumentative essay that you would have learned in school. And I think that has been a really exciting journey for me to understand what can fall under this category of essay. It's My Brown Skin is the title of this essay I'm going to read from. And that is a song title by Helado Negro, which is a great band. Every essay in this collection is also a song title, so it is part playlist, part essay collection, as a nod to my DJ roots, because I'm also a DJ. So I just wanted to mention that as well for any listeners who want to read, but also listen to a playlist. There is one for Flaca. It's My Brown Skin. I want to know what parts of me are evil. I want to know which parts of my body I should push away and which parts of my body I should hold close. Quiero saber qué partes de mi cuerpo fueron nacido de la tierra, from la mamapacha, from the green lakes and golden marigolds of Michoacan, not from the rolling hills of Spain. The pixelized map of the earth informs me I am roughly 1 part Indígena, 2 parts colonizadora, a blend of resilience and violence, stories of uprising and rebellion, slaughter and suppression buried deep within my veins, a comprehensive history of the conflicting Americas coursing through my own blood. Ancestry.com reports I am more of my father than I am of my mother. It also tells me I am definitively more white than anything else. My cells are precisely 60% European, 33% Native, and 7% African. When I mailed off my plastic tube of spit, I hoped my DNA would yield somewhat uncomplicated results. Perhaps the name of a tribe or the names of dead loved ones, an insight into my father's blonde-turned-black hair, or another long-lost half-sibling, further evidence of my papi's past. Maybe the discovery of a new tiny town from which I might further trace our roots. Instead, I discover 1/3 of my body can be traced to an unwieldy, semi-opaque turquoise blob spanning the stretches of the Americas. The rest of me is a microscopic patchwork of los españoles, europeos, y africanos. I wonder what my future will look like now that I have discovered, despite the cafecito of my piel and the way that I've been treated, that I am indeed white. I wonder if this is God's sick way of finally answering my prayers, if he gets off on playing games with my sense of self. I wonder who will believe me. Scripted commercials and real-life conversations about Ancestry.com revolve around the uncomplicated DNA of white people. It turns out I'm part Swedish. No wonder I'm so in love with minimalist design. My great-grandmother was half Italian. Makes sense why I love drinking really good coffee. They and I are supposed to be given answers, but my Ancestry.com results are not so innocuous. My DNA story does not reveal why I love black coffee or particle board IKEA furniture. My DNA story screams, you are created from centuries of colonization, the backs of Black and brown people, your stepping stone. I do not receive answers. I only receive more questions. I want to know if my fingernails are Tarascan or Purépecha. I want to know if my teeth were formed from the sandy shores of northern Spain, if the flesh of my gums were descendants of the Aztecs, if the lines on my elbow were shaped from my Senegalese. I want to know what language my abuela's abuela, my tatarabuela, spoke before her tongue was cut out. Which ancestors represent the dirt that gathers behind my ears? Which ancestors represent the blood that pours from my left nostril? I want to know why the colonization of the Americas is a catch-22, settler borders and blood quantum separating Native Americans from other original peoples stretching wide across our landmass. Why colonization stays steady conspiring, chugging along to keep our ancestral roots buried. I want to know if the darkness I call the Prado anger is a transfer passed down from the crimes of our ancestors. I want to know what it would sound like to say my name if my blood and our hands were fully clean. I want to know if we come from a people who are cursed. I want to know which one of my ancestors' descendants are good, but I am too afraid to know who might be bad. I want to know who my ancestors were. I'm also too afraid to ask. I want to tell my ancestors, mira, aquí todavía estamos. I want to tell my ancestors I still dream in Spanish. I want to tell my ancestors I am so angry they raped and tried to eradicate and decimate my other ancestors. I want to tell my ancestors they are so fucking confusing. I want to scream at Ancestry.com because he did not give me my ancestors' good stories. I want to know who Ancestry.com thinks he is, rewriting what I have come to know about myself, erasing everything I have been taught. But I want to know how I can find peace, even when I hate parts of myself for killing off other parts of myself, even when I don't know whose side I can take as my own, even when I want to know which ways to slice and carve the evil from my bones, from my body, even when I still want to know which parts of my body are truly mine. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm about to cry, but I think that was beautiful. Not only has writing been a tool, but I think listening through this different lens and listening to writing being retold in such a way where it 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 touched my heart, especially because I'm from Michoacan. I was brought here when I was 5, and I've never felt more disconnected from my land. And so hearing your words, and it is healing. It feels less lonely. And I feel like that's what we talked about, how writing has been this powerful tool in whatever way we put it, if it's music, if it's writing poetry, if it's even just I did a poem in the shape of a heart. And so I draw with my words now. And I think it really just kind of leads into my next question of how important hearing these stories like your own and from other underrepresented writers of color and how impactful it is. So I don't know, I want to open that up to you and Marie and Consuelo just to kind of talk about the impact that we've had. I know for me, this is something new, being able to interview different types of writers that have brought so much knowledge to me. And it's been a privilege to have this opportunity. And I just wish I could share it with my whole family and everyone else. And so, I don't know. What do you, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, you want to go first?
No, go ahead. Finish.
Sorry. I just wanted to thank you for sharing all that, with your heart. I feel it. And it's also such a good reminder to me when I can feel nervous about sharing words or even writing them, right? Like being able to come to writing with knowing that honestly, like the messiness and the questions, the essaying, actually essay as a word means to attempt or to try. So I think about essay as a form of exploring something that you don't really necessarily have the answer to, and you might not have the answer to when you walk away from that essay. And so even though that can be really scary and vulnerable for me to put that on the page, to say, hey, I am a person whose parents are both from Michoacan, and I don't know what to make of my severed ancestry, and I don't want to ignore that I have indigenous ancestry because that is what colonization has taught us to do. And also, my experience has not been of a person who is living as an indigenous person in Mexico. So, there's all this complexity and nuance that can be really uncomfortable to share. So thank you for hearing it. And I'm really, glad and feel that, it connected with you. So thank you for sharing that. And I think it's just a reminder to, not only Latina writers, but other writers, right, from who are pushed to the margins, that even though our stories might be treated as though they are less important than, whether that's because of the publishing industry, or even in film, right, our stories are told less often. Our stories are disproportionately erased, especially in context to how much we represent the United States, right? Stories are still very white and cis and straight and hetero. And straight and hetero, the same thing. But anyways, even with all that, our stories really matter, right? Having these connections, even on a one-to-one, even with yourself on the page, they matter and they're important. They help us understand not only ourselves, but others, right? We can connect through them. Storytelling belongs to everybody. And I think stories are what make us human, right? It's how we document and share and exchange and think and are challenged. And so our stories definitely matter. Again, no matter what form or context you end up putting them out in.
Consuelo?
Yeah, I was just going to say what this is so wonderful, and it just brings a lot of joy to me in the moment. And it is very emotional. When you hear, you, Emily, and Itzia, and it gives me so much hope in terms of where we're going and what that will look like. And I'm so appreciative. I mean, I'm just, gracias. That's all I can say. De corazón.
Emily, you are a beautiful teacher. You teach with your heart, with your experience of your life experience, and it's so relatable. I wish I'd had you for my teacher when I was younger, and like Consuelo, it gives me hope because it's my prayer that our younger generation, all of our children and grandchildren, those that are born and not born yet, they have it a bit easier than you had it, you and Itzia, your generation, and for Consuelo and I, for, easier than what we had. This is powerful. And I realize in hearing you read from Funeral for Flaca, how layered I am in terms of my assimilation and having grown up in a white Southern California suburb, and how I've learned to, to find my way with a lot of pain, but with determination and with many mentors and the love of my familia. But there's been, that deep part of me as it relates to skin color and as it relates to being multicultural, with my father being from Sweden. And minimalism, yes, that's definitely a value of mine. And my mother being from Ecuador, and who is still living at the age of 102 and a half. And me being, born and raised in white Southern California. And what does that mean? And I could feel it in my soul when you were reading, Emily. Your beautiful, beautiful words. I will go back to my book. I've got my book here, and I will go back and I will reread it, and I will write about it. Yeah, it's very powerful, and we are blessed for you to be sharing your gifts with the world.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, it means a lot from being at this age of 23 and just still, I still feel like high school was just yesterday. And so hearing from writers like yourself, it basically, it puts what I have experienced, what I've always felt in my heart, that disconnect, into words. And in hearing it, just like Marie said, I want to go back and write more about it, just kind of put it all out in words, because it is something that I myself struggle with a lot. And I know from my groups on campus and just speaking to my peers, a lot of times when it comes to our Chicano population, our undocumented population, our Latina community in general, we do feel that disconnect a lot of times. There is that way on how could I honor my family? How I know a big thing that was incited in us was honoring our family's struggles and honoring their sacrifices. But now learning and having all these interviews, it's also honoring their joy and their happiness. And they had smiles, they had good times, they had things to look forward to, the sunny days and the beautiful sunsets. And so switching that narrative and being able to hear it from other people, other writers of color, it makes me feel that this isn't a journey that is just for, people that are predominantly white and in that communities, but it's a journey for all of us, and it feels almost like being seen. So
Emily, did you have any final thoughts for us before we end?
I'm really appreciative of this, to be in this space, multi-generational, and to have a moment, I think also to just pause and think deeply about writing and our place in the world and all that we're doing, I think as individuals, collectively as well, contribute to, again, what the future looks like, what the world looks like today. And I just appreciate the space to do that. I think life can be so busy, right? We have so many obligations. And so just really being appreciative of this moment to be mindful and to share the space for what it is, right? Even in this hour, I feel just changed, even in not just today, but I think that conversations like this are fuel to keep me moving. And I just appreciate all that you've given to me in this space, to your listeners, all that you're doing with your work. So thank you all for sharing this space with me.
Thank you. And we would like to remind our listeners, you can buy Emily's book, Funeral for Flaca, at your favorite bookstore, maybe Latinx bookstore or BIPOC bookstore, indie bookstore, and maybe on Amazon. But we want you to find it, to read it, and enjoy it like we have. And again, thank you, Emily, for being with us. And thank you to our listeners for joining us. I would just like to say one thing before we end, and that is yesterday we received the news that First Lady Rosalind Carter died. And I would just like to say, in this world of so many lies and corruption and manipulation, she exemplified the best of a life lived with purpose. Thank you, First Lady Carter. We are honored to have you, our treasured listeners, with us today and joining us here on Abuelas en Accion. And we thank Familias en Accion in Portland for their commitment to Abuelas and their generous support. Please join us again on Abuelas en Accion. Gracias.